Okay. Okay, I'll just make the standard announcements. First of all, I'd just like to welcome everybody to, I guess it's nearly the end of summer, and most of you have all been on holidays, and we're ready to get stuck into these year's agendas and the work we've got to do. So welcome back, everybody. I'd just like to read the notes. So please note, this meeting is filmed live or subsequent broadcast via the council's website, which is http://www.leicestershire.gov.uk. Notices will be on the display at the meeting explaining the arrangements. So welcome to today's committee, and I hope you're really fresh from the break. But some sad news. Firstly, with great sadness that I must report the death of County Councillor and Vice Chairman of Councillor David Jennings on the 30th of August 2019, aged 72, which is relatively still young these days. David has served with the committee since his election in '92, including as Chairman of the Environment and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee. David was a lovely bloke, sense of humour, worked with everybody, not a bad word to say about anybody, and he will be missed. He was very special. I personally would talk to him, and we would all share jokes as well, and I've got such fond memories, and it's a sad time. So I'd like you to just stand now, and we just have a 1 minute memory of David. Thank you. I'd also like to remind everyone present that it is broadcast live. Please make sure you use the microphones, all phones away, and make sure you turn the microphones off when you finish speaking. It just interferes with the mechanics of the working. So I'd like to start off item 1, minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of June. I'd like to propose the minutes of the meeting are taken and confirmed as signed. Are we happy with that as a group? Thank you very much. I'll sign them in a minute, yeah, take that. Question time. I've received no questions from members of the public. Item 3 on the agenda. We have received a question from Dr. Enyon under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. Everyone should have a copy of this question and answer, which also has been provided by Dr. Enyon. So these can be taken that it's read. I'd like to remind members that no discussion is to be held on the question. So because it's been read, you've had copies of it. Dr. and I think would like to maybe add to the question. I will say also the normal member she's representing, Maxon, also followed this through many a time, which we actually understand, and you'll represent him while he's on holiday. So I'm sure over to you then, Dr. Enyon.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, Max Hunt has helped to put this question together, clearly, as he's done work on this issue. Now, and thank you for the reply, which is very helpful. And as I understand it, the main issue which is in the last line, which is that we don't actually have a statutory responsibility to provide post-16 SEND transport, only to facilitate. And one of the issues I think we've got all over this council is that the poverty of funding for SEN transport, which is causing us huge problems. So my questions are, what are we doing as a council? Because I'm sure you're aware there are parents campaigning. There is a Close the Loop campaign, which is beginning in the county, which is nothing to do with my side, but it's just arising from the parents. So what are we already doing as a council, perhaps even wider than this committee, to actually reduce the cost of transport, SEND transport for parents? And how can we support those parents who are wanting to make representation to the government in particular over this, what they see as a loophole in post-16 transport? How can we support them in their campaign to get this properly funded?
Thank you. I'll hand over shortly. Look, from my point of view, and everybody here, that we really are concerned. The most vulnerable are very important to us. One of the reasons why we're all here. And I think all of us will know or have family that have people with special educational needs. I, for one, understand the issue, but we have the issue of the mid-term financial strategy, funds, and this is not just Leicester, it's throughout the UK. Let's be honest. It is an issue. There was a legal thing, and I think Anne will talk to it, and Blake. But you know, I do believe we're doing our best, and I will continue to work as best we can and provide for the most vulnerable in very difficult times, Terry. But I'll hand over to Anne now to give you some additional information, which I've got, but I'll leave it to Anne because she lives and breathes it a little bit more than me, but I think I could do it, but I'll give you the show now, okay? Over to you.
Appreciate that, Chair. Thank you. In terms of the two specific questions, what we're doing as a council to reduce costs, I'm sure members are very aware, given our MTFS situation, just the escalation in costs, particularly across SEN, affecting children and families, and then my department on the SEN transport, and how that is continually, year on year, growing at an exponential rate. What we're doing as a council, within my department, we have, we're continually, through our procurement, challenging the costs. E-auctions, for instance, is one way to do that, to make sure that we're minimising the costs of those. We try and make sure that it is multiple transport, i.e. it carries more than one person, where that is feasible. Now, you will understand with SEN that is not always feasible, and it often in many occasions has to be solo transport, but where we can, we will put it in multiple transport. We will also revise routes every so often regularly. We go back to look and say if we've got a number of people on transport from A to B, actually if we're revising routes, can we drive out cost savings through that? More wider corporately, you may be aware that the council has committed to investing 30 million in SEN provision within the county to provide another 700 places, SEN places in the county. Now, obviously, what that means in terms of transport is in scenarios where we either have to transport a child or an individual from, say, at the moment, one end of the county to the other, or sometimes, as is the case, outside the county, there should, in theory, then be less of that, and there'll be more localised trips, which has an implication, obviously, for hopefully savings in the transport budget there. So, a big corporate investment in order to try and control those costs, both within my department for transport and obviously within children's and families. How can we better support, or how can we support parents in making that case to government? Because as you say, legislation isn't particularly helpful here, and it's certainly not backed up with funding to councils. We have no specific funding for school transport. What we do actually at the moment, and particularly through the Association of Directors of Children's Services, and I'm sure you will have seen in the media over the last few months about the growing recognition of the challenges across the SEN sector and those escalating costs. A few years ago it was maybe more focused on adult social care. However, there is a growing realisation that SEN is in a very similar position. Actually, the funding models are not sustainable for the level of demand and the growing level of demand we're seeing across the country. So we are very proactive in that through our Children's Services Director. You will be aware as well, perhaps, that the County Councils Network, the CCN, have raised this as a major issue with government, and our leader is very involved in that, as has the LGA. We would very much support parents, maybe through groups like Family Matters, established Leicestershire groups, also putting in their voice to that, because the more government takes this seriously and addresses it to what is a growing demand across the country. We're not the only authority that's really struggling with this. It is a national problem. The more voices to that, the better. So we'd fully support them in doing that, and I would suggest through those recognised groups, etc., to make that case to government the same way we as local authorities are doing.
Thank you, Anne. Are you okay? Just Blake, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for bringing this question. It's really important. From my perspective as lead member of the department, I'm pleased that the policy actually has been through a thorough scrutiny of the courts, and my understanding is that all 5 counts were awarded in the County Council's favour. That doesn't make it any less easy to implement this policy because, as you rightly pointed out, we are constrained by the resources that we have to discharge the policy. To that extent, I'm happy that we are undertaking a review, not least to try and find out how other authorities are driving the cost down of transport, because that will inform how we can do that too. We have our own ideas, and we're constantly looking at innovative ways of controlling the resources and meeting the demands placed upon the County Council. But I'd add just one further thing, if I may, Chairman. In the last few weeks, the government have announced a £14 billion additional funding for schools. My understanding is that £700 million of that will be specific to SEN children, because it's really important that SEN children aren't preventing from getting the education that they need and deserve. So what we've yet to work out is how much of that 700 million will be attributed to transportation costs and how much will be at our disposal to further support the policies that we have in place. But it's something I care about, and it's something the Council cares about, and we manage as best we can at this point in time. Thanks.
Thank you, Blake. I'll just add a final note. When I spoke to briefing with Terry earlier, I think you've all got to be made aware that these SCN children or young people now can stay on to school to 25. That also adds to our burden in the future, so we have to get this right. So the time is right, and I agree with Blake and Anne and Terry, and I'm sure we all agree here that we need to make representation where we can, because this is a very important situation for us to keep an eye on. Thank you. The next agenda item is item 4. It's to do with the chairman has decided any urgent. Well, I haven't, so there's no urgent items. 5, declaration of interest in respect of item on the agenda. All dual hatters will have, so we won't go into it. There is dual hatters. There is district stuff here to regard to. Terry, you've got fire away.
I have an interest. I sit on the Bard and Aggregates Liaison Committee.
That's fair enough for you then. Thank you. So the rest of us, then, it's noted that the district council, we have got district involvement in a lot of the environmental stuff. Okay, so we'll accept that.
Sorry, Chair.
Thank you, James.
I sit on a liaison committee with a quarry as well, but I've literally never been to a meeting. They meet once every God knows how many years when I'm at work, but technically I am a member. So
I've read about that committee. Don't you have to dig a few holes while you're there just to see how it's done?
we did tell you to bring your wellies.
Ozzy.
Chair, I also sit on the Group B Quarry Liaison Committee, but in the planning department we usually take the liaison committees as read like dual hatters, so I don't know whether you want to do that.
Thank you, Ozzy. Blake?
Whilst everyone else is declaring their interest, I happen to sit on a liaison committee as well to do with Shoal. All of them as read.
I think Mo's just said that now. No need to worry, you're all covered. Okay, thank you. Okay, with presentations and petitions, we haven't any. Unusual for this committee, but I'm sure we'll have some in the future, and we always welcome them. Number 8, we now have to cover the Minerals and Waste Local Plan. That's pages, would you believe, 13 to 176 in your pack. Luckily, we've got the head of planning, Nick, because this overlaps, doesn't it, Nick? We'll talk to you in a minute, but it overlaps a number of areas in the County Council, this. And also, I think we've got Susie. Hello, Susie, welcome. Hello, Susie, remember the song? That was a good song years ago. Sorry, and where's Steve? There's Steve. There's Steve in the corner. I've got you down here. Hello, Steve. They're going to go through the report quickly. They've promised me that we won't talk about bridges, and they will answer some questions appropriately as we get on. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This report relates to the adoption of the Minerals and Waste Local Plan for Leicestershire. And apologies that so much paper in your agenda pack, but we thought it was best that you
Nick,
could see
sorry,
the
can I just interrupt? It is a fabulous report. It's very in-depth, and somebody did say, well, it's a lot of pages, but it's a policy, if I remember, very in-depth. So everybody I've spoken to briefing, congratulate you. It was an excellent report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is a statutory requirement for the new local plan to be produced, and all local authorities have to do that and plan for the future. This will replace a number of current policy documents, including a couple of 2009 documents, the Minerals Core Strategy and the Waste Core Strategy for Leicester and Leicestershire. And when this is adopted, it will inform the statutory plan for minerals and waste for Leicestershire and guide decision-making going forward. The plan has been produced in line with national planning policy, and that has evolved and changed since actually we started doing this in 2013. And it will ensure that we have a steady supply of minerals, which is a requirement of government going forward. It sets also out a strategy for increasing the reuse of materials and the recovery of energy from waste, which is a move away from landfill as a means of disposal, reducing the reliance on primary minerals. You'll see from the report that this document has taken a long time to produce, 6 years. Lots of hard work from the various officers, stakeholders involved with the production of this plan. Consultations taken place extensively, and that's also set out in terms of with operators and landowners, but also local residents, adjoining authorities, district councils, and other stakeholders. It's been repeated on 8 different occasions, so it has been comprehensive. The plan was subject to independent examination last October, and 2 inspectors held hearings into the plan. And they considered views and evidence from a wide range of bodies and groups, and that tested its compliance in terms of its legal compliance, but also its accordance with national planning policy and whether it's a sound document for forming policy going forward. You'll see in your pack you've got a copy of the inspector's report, and that's on page 17 going forward. They have found the plan sound, subject to 3 relatively minor, in fact very minor modifications, and those of you who know local plan processes will know that modifications can sometimes run for many pages. So we were very impressed that there was just 3 relatively modest modifications to the plan. And those modifications have been subject also to consultation earlier on this year. I'll hand over to Susie now. I've obviously only been at the County Council since the start of the year, so I haven't lived and breathed the plan like my colleagues to the left of me, so which is why we've come a little bit mob-handed today, but we wanted to make sure we're able to answer any questions that members have got. But I'll just pass over to Susie just to briefly touch on some of the key points, if that's okay, Chairman.
Thank you, Nick. Susie.
Thank you, Chair. I would just introduce myself as I'm a freelance planning consultant, and I'm based in Oxfordshire. And I have worked for Leicestershire on various things in the past. And I'm sort of used to doing local plans. I didn't write this one. I only came in at the stage when it needed to go to submission and examination, and was asked to see that process through. So when I read the plan, I was really impressed with it. It's a really good plan. It's very thorough, but succinct and very clear. And I just wanted to say that with my experience of having dealt with, and as a practitioner, having dealt with other plans which can be way more complicated, and I just think it is a very good plan. As you've been told, it's been in preparation since 2013, and that process involved revisions which took on board comments that had been made on the plan, so that the plan was revised through that process. There were actually relatively few objections to the plan. It's quite normal to have several hundred into 1,000. There was, I think, 30 odd on this plan. And that was reflected in the short duration of the examination hearings. We had only 2 half-day sessions, and it's also reflected in the very few, or the 3 modifications required by the inspectors. The issues that were raised at consultation stages were essentially the concern that whether there was adequate provision to be made for sand and gravel supply, hydrocarbons, and inert waste disposal. Also, there were a few issues raised about that sites had been nominated by the industry were not being allocated in the plan. There were a couple of sites that weren't found to be suitable. The inspectors were satisfied, however, that the level of provision was appropriate and fully justified by the evidence. They also agreed with the council's reasons for not allocating the sites that had been nominated. and felt that the plan adequately catered in other ways for meeting any shortfall in capacity that may potentially arise, including for Leicester City. A couple of issues were raised about the development management policies, that they were too demanding in respect of protecting heritage assets and in terms of site restoration requirements. But the inspectors found that the policy objectives were consistent with national policy, were robust, effective, and not unduly onerous on the developers. Only 3 modifications to the plan were required by the inspectors. These were essentially in order to provide a little more flexibility in sand and gravel supply and to clarify policy requirements for hydrocarbon development proposals. This new plan, when adopted, will provide one fully up-to-date plan for determining minerals and waste development proposals in the county, and will be a far more accessible and user-friendly document for all concerned. It will replace the various documents that you have, which comprise whole plans plus safe policies. So you'll just have one plan going forward.
Thank you, Susie. Anybody else would like to comment? Any questions? I think Bill, fire away, mate.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very interesting report. Long, but interesting. Just one or two bits I'd like to pick out. I'm a little concerned regarding the item on unconventional hydrocarbons on top of the page 29. I've got 2 page numbers, so page 29, about fracking, shale gas. Item number 63, actually. Okay, right, Nick. Yeah.
Would you like to do all of them and then we'll answer all? How many you've got?
Oh, we're not doing 6:05, are we? No, there's not many. I'm concerned about the extraction of shale gas in view of what's happening elsewhere in the country with earth tremors and everything else. And when we sat here some time ago, Nick's predecessor, Lonick, sat there at a meeting and said, we have no intentions of allowing shale gas extraction in this county. And I read this report, and that's not what it says now. So I'm a bit concerned that previous officers have said we're not going to allow it, and now we tend to keel over and say we're going to allow it. I wondered, in view of what's happening in the rest of the country, whether we perhaps ought to draw a line under that at the present time and see what's happening elsewhere, because I don't know if the tremors are still going on, but there were a few weeks ago, and I'm a bit concerned about what we're entering into here is a new industry to us. I know it's happening in other countries, but they're not so densely populated as us, and there's bigger areas between extraction and residential areas.
Bill, can I? Where do you get the assumption? Does it say that? Could you read?
What?
It doesn't. I'm struggling to. It says we've got it, but it does say it is not known. Is there any potential for the exploitation of this? It doesn't say we're going to do it.
And
Are you assuming it?
I'm just assuming that.
Is that what you're assuming? Because it doesn't say what you're saying. I just need some help from you.
What I'm trying to say is now is, can we put a line under that at the present time till we get things sorted out before we go down that route?
Let's get Suze to answer that one, because this is an important. Or Nick, is that over to you?
I'll attempt to answer that one. Thank you. In order for the plan to be found sound, we need to make sure we address matters that are within the National Planning Policy Framework. And there's an expectation through that from government that all plans going forward will deal with policies to do with hydrocarbons, which obviously includes fracking. So what that basically does is gives us control over the different stages in the event that there's developer interest in taking that forward. It doesn't mean that we would say yes, it doesn't mean that would come forward, and in all likelihood I think it potentially wouldn't come forward. I think that the advice perhaps you've previously been given was correct, but we can't assume that's the case. And in order to get this plan adopted, we need to make sure that there's a policy in there that gives us that control, so that we know what we're doing in terms of how to assess that application and the various stages as set out within the policy. Is there anything you want to add, Susie? Or
Yeah, there was just I mean, there's been recent additional government advice that says that, authorities must be positive towards fracking or exploration for these things. And in terms of the issues you're concerned about with earthquakes and so on, the process is also controlled by the Energy and Industrial, is it now called the Department for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, and the Health and Safety Executive. So this authority is only concerned with whether the principle of the development is acceptable or not in terms of how it affects the local environment, the buildings, the above ground impact, if you like. When it comes to the actual drilling, that's controlled by other authorities, and that's what's happened in, as I understand, the place near Liverpool. They were suspended while they did further investigations into that. So if, again, because they've had more issues, what they will do is they will suspend their permit or license. I'm not quite sure what it is they have to get from them, but they won't allow the process to go ahead if they fear that there's a risk to public health.
Okay, so in other words, we have got some control measures we can adopt if need be, if a site comes forward for working on an adoption. That's the main thing. We've got somewhere we can say no. But what worries me is you say national policy is we've got to say yes. And when we get to a planning committee, officers always turn around and say, well, it's national policy, we've got to do this because government say so. So the decision is taken away from local members. It won't affect my area, but other members it will affect their area. And they've got nothing about it.
Yeah, the government advice has been a recent, I can't remember, ministerial statement saying authorities must be positive, have a positive approach to it, because we have to find alternative means of energy. So that's government policy. It's very strong government policy that you must have a positive approach to it. However, what this authority has to deal with is the above ground paraphernalia associated with that. Is it the right location for it? It's the use of the above the land above ground.
I'm even more worried now, Chair, because it's been taken out of our hands now by other people, and we're only concerned what's above ground, not what's below, and what's going to happen to other areas.
So we clarify, I'm quite clear on this. We have to put that in or the plan would not be accepted, basically. We know that. So we've got no choice. Secondly, it's an assumption. We don't know whether it's going to happen or not. So if it does, then I think that's the time we can start debating it. And I do agree we need to discuss it. But at the moment, nobody's applied. We're not sure. It may never happen, correct?
If this policy weren't in the plan, this plan would not be sound.
So I can understand the concern, but also I think we're not to or make assumptions that it's automatically going to happen. I think if something does happen, then that's the time we stand up and start saying what's going on. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I just wanted to control that we can actually say reasons why we don't have to do it, as long as we've got some reasons there.
I think we still have control to a certain degree, but what we haven't control is what the government asks in regard to policy and document. They're requesting certain things, as even at district we have that with the local planning rules and laws. You know that. So I think it's sound because we're getting the plan through. But sometimes getting a plan through means you do have control. I think if we didn't get the plan through, it may put us in a situation of being actually with no plan, and that was more likely developers could come in or exploration without our control. So I'm happy with this personally, but I do think it can come back to us, and I do think we have still a say in this, and I think you agree with that. Yeah. Can we move on? One more from Bill.
On page 25 at the top, or 9 at the bottom, 38, crush rock provision. Just to confirm that there is no identified requirement for the plan to make any specific allocations for new sites.
That's correct. There are no allocations for specific
And we
sites
can
for
defend
crush rock.
that if we get challenged, can we?
Yeah,
Because now it's gone through the inspector.
That's right. There's a huge land bank of crush rock in the county. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So there you go, Bill. Some work for us, some don't. So there you go. David, over to you.
Point about fracking on page 79. it does say that planning permission will be granted for proposals which involve the process of associated hydraulic fracturing, etc., etc., providing it can be demonstrated that the proposal can accord with the requirements for various factors. And as Susie has said, that the rules which we have to operate under means that we can only give consideration to structures above ground. But of course, as we all know, the Lancashire experience has been that there is probably an impact on earthquakes or tremors in that vicinity. So I'm just wondering whether our concerns over this could be minuted at least, even if we, obviously we have to agree this plan, but it is so full of interesting questions that need further investigation, which we haven't got time to enter into today or possibly in the future. But I think could I simply ask that our concerns, I mean it might just be Bill and myself, but I mean others as well have got concerns about this, could just open the way to development which we could be deemed to have approved by approving this plan.
Thanks, Bill. I think just by discussing it in the minutes that we've got in the meeting, I think all of us agree that if it doesn't fit, and I read this, that it does make it quite clear, if it does impact on water, it impacts on the infrastructure, and when I read it, local equality, there's a number of issues there that we can question and stop it if necessary. But I think just the minutes it's the meeting being held now, I think it'd be minuted that we have got some concerns. Is that correct, Mo, at all? That's Mo? Quite happy with that? Yeah. So I don't think we need to make any special. We are talking now. It is your views. And I think all of our views are, we don't want anything that's going to cause earthquakes, unless you live in New Zealand, and then you just have to put up with them, but or California. So it is noted because of the very nature of this committee. But I do understand your concerns, gentlemen. Over to Terry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I do share the concerns raised by my friends over the other side about the seismic problems with fracking, but I also accept that, yes, we're better with a plan than without a plan, because with the plan we've got some rules. We've got some rules by which we can protect ourselves. But I think the other point on page 29, where it's saying about coal. Now, at the moment, I don't think anyone's planning to open any coal up, as far as I'm aware. But it's saying permission should not be given for the extraction of coal unless the proposal is environmentally acceptable. We've just passed a climate change emergency motion. Is the extraction of coal ever going to be acceptable? Which is when I come up to my sensible question, which is, it took 6 years to make this plan. It lasts for 12 years. Bearing in mind the changing nature of evidence, particularly as we spiral towards more climate change, when do we start revising it?
Susie?
Didn't go on. There's it has to be reviewed every 5 years, the plan. That's a statutory requirement, and it may have to be reviewed sooner than that as well. If certain targets in the annual monitoring report aren't met, they would trigger a review of the plan. So, but in any event, in 5 years' time.
Thank you. It's a bit of a shame, Terry, because around Melton we've got some of the best coal in the world. Seems wonderful coal as well, but can't use it anymore. Okay, over to Ozzy. Okay, are we happy we move on to the next agenda item? Thanks, Bill.
What you say about Melton is extraordinary. You've raised something that happened 30 years ago when this county council was torn apart by those who by those from Terry's area who were desperate to find a new coalfield for Leicestershire, and His Grace the Duke and others who were opposed to anything happening in the Vale of Belvoir. So I think that I hope we're not going there again.
Can I just thank...
On a point of order, Chair,
thank you, Dave.
Has to answer this.
Sorry.
In this document, it says plan permission will be granted. Now, I always thought that Planning Committee, the Rent Control Committee, made that decision. With this saying it will be permitted, how does that fit with the planners? Because
Over to Nick.
Every
He's already.
application decides on its merits.
I think he's, by looking at his smile, he's ready for this one. Over to Nick.
Thank you, Chairman. No, absolutely. It is a DCRB, Development Control Regulatory Board, decision about whether to grant planning permission, but we are required by government to plan positively, so that's why you see policies worded in a way that planning permission will be granted rather than may be granted or won't be granted until. So we have to plan positively, which is why it's worded that way, but it's still exactly the same in that the members have a decision to make and can refuse if it's not acceptable.
Can I just like to thank you? It is a comprehensive report. We know all of you, and I know everybody appreciated it here. And once again, thank you, and look forward to seeing you in 6 years' time or whatever it is. Okay, thank you very much. We're now on to Agenda 9. It's Environment and Transport Performance Report. This is in your pack, page 177 to 196, and I think we go to Anne for this. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the performance report up to June 2019, and you will see there's been a number of indicators that have been updated. If there is no, on the, if I take you to Appendix A on page 183, if there is no arrow under that direction of travel arrow column, it means we haven't actually had an update on that indicator in the latest period, because we don't actually have any new data and it isn't collected that frequently, the data. What I propose to do is just to highlight to you any changes we've had since our last reporting, and then take you on to a bit about national benchmarking, if that's all right. So if we start with environment and waste performance, on that first one, percentage of local authority collected waste landfilled, you'll see it's largely the same as before. There's been a 0.4% increase in the amount landfilled, so that's a deterioration performance, although slightly. But we are over our target. We're not meeting our target there. Now, members have had, this panel has had a comprehensive report on the reasons for that in the past, and you will well be familiar with the fact that procurements over the next couple of years should see movement in that indicator, but it won't be until that time. The next indicator, percentage of household waste sent by local authorities for reuse, recycling and composting. There's been no change in that particular one, and we are in the third quartile there. Household waste, however, waste per household kilograms, the next indicator down, we have actually, that has moved from 1,034 kilograms to 1,040 kilograms per household. So that's seen a slight increase, which is a deterioration in performance, but it still does meet target. You know, you'll see the target there of 1,041 kilograms. In terms of moving on to the waste produced from LCC sites, there we have we've got good performance there. Waste is continuing to decline, and as you'll see that with the movement there. In terms of waste recycled from LCC sites, we have seen a decline from 63% in the previous reporting period to 60%, just over 60% there. I mean, I would reassure members that the team is continuing to work across our buildings, and particularly at the moment we're having a focus on adult social care buildings, to work with the staff there to make sure that we're maximising and we up those rates of recycling at those facilities. So we have got an activity, activity going on behind that particular indicator, to try and see that move in the right direction. Next one I want to take you to is street lighting, further down the page. CO2 emissions from our street lighting. You'll see actually the emissions that has actually increased from last period, so performance has gone down. It's increased from 3,933 up to 4,023 tonnes of carbon. That is purely because of the seasonal impact. That is, the previous figures were Q2, so Q2 is July to the end of September, and Q3 is obviously October to December. Am I right in the quarters? I'm right in the quarters. We're financial years. So obviously street lighting comes on a wee bit earlier at night and will go off a wee bit later. So, you know, there will always be that seasonal variation in emissions. So that, you know, purely is down to, you know, that movement there. Business miles claimed, you'll see there's been a slight increase from the last period where that has gone up from just marginally 5,839, sorry, that's not 1,000, that's hundreds of thousands here, that unit. We've just gone up marginally on that, so decrease in performance. Just over the last few quarters, we have been looking at this one, and it does look like we may have plateaued as an organisation in terms of that mileage. Other activities coming along, we're looking at a fleet review. We've also got a grey fleet review, which is, you know, business miles in your own personal car, and we have a county hall travel plan, and you know that has been reinvigorated over the last 6 months to a year, and you know I think activities in that should try and, you know, be aimed or will help to, you know, aim at that target in some activities to see if we really have plateaued or if we can get some more traction on that. Moving over the page to the transport performance there, the top of the page, total casualties on the road, and the committee is very familiar with our activities on that and what we do, and you have received extensive reports on these particular ones because obviously they are fairly significant. We have seen an increase in that first one, total casualties. Last reporting was 1,136, and as you'll see, it's gone up slightly to 1,161. Does meet target. And again, I would just remind you about, you know, the discrepancies we've been seeing recently in terms of police reporting activity there, and we still are working with the police to fully understand the implications of that. The next one, killed or seriously injured, again that has gone up. Last time it was 231, we're at 236. Again, obviously a movement in the wrong direction is not what we'd want to see. We are still, for both those indicators, top quartile. So in terms of road safety, we do perform well across the country. Obviously, as you well know, however, we've got significant activity to look to continue to support and make sure that those numbers come down. The only other one I'm going to pick out for you in the table is local bus passenger journeys. And up to the end of March, the figure is, you'll see there, 13.4, and that's up from 13.01. Now, I'm sure committee, you know, we've tracked this over years, haven't we? And we're always round about 13 or just below or just above. Really is a bit of a plateau there. However, you know, that's the right direction. We're going in that. We are fourth quartile, but for us to get up to third quarter, we would have to be over 14 million, a significant difference given our long-term trends of round about the 13 million mark. However, I'm not taking away from the fact that actually we have seen an increase in passenger journeys up to March this year. I'll just take you on then to, we thought it might be useful, this is slightly different for this report, to add in a bit of national benchmarking, just to give you a bit more of a picture about how we're performing in these areas against other county councils. Now, I will come on to some caveats around that, but if I take you to page 187 in your pack, what this does, this is benchmarking carried out by our business and intelligence colleagues in corporate who benchmark us against other county council authorities across a number of indicators. That chart there, you'll pick out Leicestershire in the bottom right-hand quadrant of that chart. The axis along the bottom, if I just explain it, because I appreciate you've not seen this before, or you haven't seen it in this report anyway, you may have seen it in other places, is revenue per head, spend per head of population. So the further you are to the right, that's low spend per head of population. Therefore, that is good, you know, efficiencies, etc., etc. Or it may not be good, it may be your entirety of your budget and all you've got, but spend per head anyway, okay? And your access up the left-hand side is our performance. So how we are performing related to those other county councils. So what we see for the first one is environment and waste. Actually, while we've got a low spend per head, we're actually in the lower end of the performance as well. Now, what I would take you to on that is we do take this with a hint of we have to caveat it for you. There's 7 indicators behind this. Many of the indicators are not actually within our control. For instance, one of them is about the number of enforcements you do against fly tipping. Now, you'll understand that the enforcements around fly tipping is a district authority measure. It's not something we as a county council have any control over. The other thing I would caveat, in terms of the spend, it doesn't differentiate with any of those authorities where they have a entirely different waste disposal model, i.e. they have something like a PFI, so they have invested in major infrastructure, major capital investment in incineration or whatever waste disposal technology they've invested in. So actually, they're not counting that cost in here. It's a hidden cost. So actually, we're not comparing apples and apples for many of the authorities there. So while, yes, it gives us a snapshot against those indicators, what we would caveat that with is very much, it's interesting to look at that over time, but we would certainly not say it was a be-all and end-all, because we ourselves recognise that there are some weaknesses in that comparison. But just interesting there, where other authorities are, where we are, I thought it was useful to give you that snapshot. If you move over to page 189, this is the Transport and Highways equivalent of that, the environmental waste one you've just seen. Leicestershire is to save you, looking at every authority there, Leicestershire is the top right-hand quadrant. So as you'll see, we're doing quite well in terms of spend per head. We're quite low because we're towards the right-hand side. And actually, we're quite high up in performance. We're up near the top of the graph. So what I would say against this, however, as well, is there's 31 indicators behind it. And the vast majority do come within our, remit. Things like, to give you an idea, percentage of the network of your highway network requiring maintenance, your community transport provision, how you're doing in road safety, and as I've just mentioned to you, we are in the top quartile across the country when you just look at road safety alone. Local bus journeys, there's a whole host of factors there that are more in our control, etc. So we just thought it was useful to give you a bit of a, rather than most times we focus in on those individual indicators, but actually to give you a snapshot wider than how we as Leicestershire County Council is doing, because this gives you an idea across other county authorities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Anne. Any questions? Because we've been through this every so many months and it's quite self-explanatory, but I will go to Bill. Have you got any questions, mate? If you say no, I'll go. Terry first. I didn't see you, Terry. Sorry, I'm normally in this corner.
Thank you, Chair. Well, being a visitor to this, I haven't had the benefit of understanding all this before, so it's fascinating, and thank you. And I was looking at paragraph 12 on page 179, where as you've explained, we're not doing so well with the percentage of local authority collected waste which is being landfilled, and it says that we're going to do better. And I wasn't entirely sure I understood how we are going to get better. If you could explain.
We are currently out for a procurement exercise for around about 50,000 tonnes that currently go into landfill. So we have a contract to a fixed period of time, and at the moment that didn't originally go to, but it's changed through the contract, now goes to landfill. When that comes to an end over the next couple of years, our procurement will not be to landfill in future, it will be to another technology. We also have a shareholding within the Coventry
municipal waste.
Energy from waste facility. Thank you for providing the right words I couldn't think of in my head. And actually, with that arrangement, we have over the next few years, we've a set amount, 40,000 tonnes that go into that at the moment, but we have an arrangement that over the next few years, that tonnage will increase. So that is, again, diverting what's currently going into landfill, more will go into that Coventry facility. But that will happen over the next couple of years because it has to happen aligned to those contractual timescales. So we have got things in place and are putting things in place that will divert waste that's currently going into landfill and has to under contractual arrangements that will move it out of landfill. So that's what's going to take us and help that figure and reduce the amount going to landfill.
I'm interested in what you were saying about energy for waste, because given the problem that we've got with climate change and our wish not to go for fracking, is that the kind of alternative provision that you're going to be looking for, something where we get, in a sense, a double hit? We not only don't landfill, but we also provide energy.
Can I suggest I start this one off and then Joe may take over from me more on the technical stuff? I mean, what we'll say is we will always be looking at what's tried and tested technology, meeting government legislation. Yes, carbon and, you know, climate change, absolutely. And as you well know, this county council has made a declaration on climate emergency. Will come into the factor, but we will always have to put things into tried and tested technologies. But we will have to meet you know, legislative national requirements and targets. For instance, the landfill one is driven by national legislation as well. So it's a mix of those factors about where we do put those, you know, what type of technology we will put our waste into. Joe may want to add to that, however.
Thanks, Chair. If I may, I think Anne's covered it.
I think she's answered it.
She have. Really. I suppose all I'd just reiterate, just for clarity, nationally we have to get to less than 10% landfill in the future. That's the new national target. So we are setting contracts in place that will dramatically draw that down to less than 10%. In waste terms, energy from waste is better than landfill because you at least are getting a byproduct from the waste rather than just putting it in the ground. In carbon terms and climate terms, energy from waste is better than landfill because you have leachate and methane gas, but where you combine energy from waste with combined heat and power, it starts to stack up. So as technology advances, where you start to couple them with things like district heating or heat networks, you really start to see the benefits in terms of carbon. So it's a valid point, but we are considering that going forward as well.
Thank you, Joe. Just to let you know, Terry, that constantly, I think the members that have been in this committee a long time, we're constantly concerned about emissions, the environment. We can assure you that we're always questioning it, and it's top of our agenda to make sure that we get the right environmental impact on what we can. Thank you. Shall we move on to the next agenda item?
The thing is, Chair, that we should recycle as much as possible. I don't believe we are recycling as much as we should do. We should reduce the amount going to landfill, the amount going to incineration. The problem is when you start going to incineration, you need some of those materials to get the calorific values in the incinerator. So it's a balancing act now between taking plastics and wood out of the recycling. At the moment, take as much out as we can, but when we start incinerating, some of those will need to go back into the incineration to get the calorific value up for the incinerator, unless we start putting gas into it to get the heat up, unless things have changed since the working parties we had, many of them over about 18 months, about 4 years ago. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but perhaps we put 50 pence in the meter, do you think?
I know, it's a bit straight. We're trying to, but can I say this is how good this committee is? We're turning half the lights off so we save energy. And I really applaud it. Okay, thank you. We'll note that comment, and we'll I'm sure get to that later. Okay, Blake.
I can't resist. Yes, we should recycle, but we should reuse more than we should recycle. If we look at the waste hierarchy, so reuse is at the top, and then recycle comes a mere second. Thanks.
Next agenda.
We're not reusing much yet, are we?
No.
Hi. I just wanted to add that for the next report, it's going to be an annual report, so we're going to have a look back over the year, and we're also.
So we can relook at it. Great.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. Agenda item 10. I think we're over to. This is to do the dry cycling. This is Joe's expertise. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, through you, this is a report that members of this committee requested, which looks to update on the Council's approach to managing dry recyclables following the 2016 Cabinet decision to procure directly with the market and direct the districts to use that contract. Members will be aware that the 2018 MTFS identified a savings target of 1.3 million. That went up to 1.4 in subsequent years, which would come from arguably entering into this contract and the non-payment of recycling credits to districts. In the background to the report, it sets out the historical context of recycling credits, so what their purpose is, when and where we would need to pay them as the County Council, as the disposal authority, and how Cabinet came to a decision to direct the districts to a county procured contract and stop paying those credits. So following that Cabinet decision, officers undertook a procurement exercise which the districts were eligible to tender for as part of that. So they were arguably able to tender for their material or others as a consortia. And as a result of that, an organisation called GAE Holdings, they're more commonly known locally as CasePack, were awarded the contract for the majority of the dry recyclate. Apart from that, North West Leicestershire District Council did secure the contract for managing their own recyclate. Points 7 to 9 of the report set out the legal process and the timings that were associated with transitioning to the new arrangement, so linked to their contractual end dates. And points 10 to 12 look at the performance pre and post that change. And what you'll see in that table is there were lots of ups and downs. So I think what I would just suggest is you can't necessarily draw an association with this activity to exactly what's happened, because it's variable across the piece. What I would say, though, is that the good thing is that there's been very little overall change in the performance. It was a concern, would performance drop significantly, and it hasn't done that. The report does look to address the two major risks to the County Council of being able to realise the financial savings target, and those were around contamination and being exposed to the market price, which ultimately we pay for in gate fees. So if I just take quickly each of those in turn, in terms of contamination, we do list what the main contaminants are. We get really robust contamination data. When we originally proposed this approach, we modelled scenarios for contamination all the way up to around about 25–26%. And actually what we're seeing is a range of between 8 and under 11%. So we are well within range for what we had planned for. So we're comfortable with that. But we're also not sitting on our hands. We've got a lot of work in place to do targeted campaigns around contamination campaigns, working with our district colleagues and putting out a brand. So we are doing that as well. The other was market price, and obviously it's an international trading scenario. You trade internationally. So we're exposed to those fluctuations through the gate fee. The Cabinet report in 2016 acknowledged that, which is why we modelled a scenario over 12 years up to 2030, because we'd expect undulations in price over that period. And that then turned into the annual savings that I've mentioned earlier. So for 18–19 we had a target of 1.3 million as officers to realise from within the budget, and our actual savings in that year were just over 1.85 million, so we're well above target. So from an operational point of view and contractually, the approach, I would argue, has been performing well, but I'm very happy to take any questions, Chair.
Any questions? No? No? Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item quickly. Come back, Joe. Come back more often. Good on you. Well, can I say again that this committee is well briefed, and I must confess we do read it, and the questions I've asked in the past, and this helps the progress of this committee because we're well versed. We've got all members here from all parties, understand, we get briefed well, and I'd like to think that's the reason why we can move on. Next agenda item. Too late. I moved on. Too late. I did move on, sir. You're spoiling my... Oh, hey, you rascal. Hey? Okay, next agenda item. So I've lost my paper and I was getting carried away. It's all right. Next agenda item is 11, recycling household waste. Try and fit it into there, David.
Thank you, Chair. It's never going to happen, Chair. So this report is seeking views from the committee on proposed changes to the recycling household waste site service and its summer opening hours as part of a bigger project. So there's a bigger project in hand, but this is very specifically about the summer opening and is linked to another MTFS savings target that we have within the department. These are proposals which are also currently out for public consultation. So following a Cabinet decision in June, we've entered into a 12-week public consultation. The report acknowledges some of the past savings and service changes that have been applied to the RHWS service in the period since 2012, which have realised over £2 million of savings out of that service over that period. In the background to the report, we set out the nature of our statutory duties as the disposal authority in respect of running the recycling house or waste sites, how those 14 sites are currently run. So we've mentioned previously that 13 are under our direct control and management, with one that's currently contracted to a contractor. We do cover in the report that the proposal is to bring that in-house in October of next year, as well as some information on our sort of wider services around. We run a permit scheme, and we do charge for some construction and demolition non-household wastes. It's also worth me just highlighting that the current opening times are referenced in point 10, and then they're just expanded upon in Appendix C, so you get a real clarity about how the service currently operates at the moment. In points 13 and 14 of the report, we then outline the options that have been modelled and considered, linked to how we might meet these savings targets, and some of the high-level assessment criteria that we applied to that around impact on service users, impact on our staff, for example. That analysis then led to the proposal being that we're proposing to consult on here, and that's covered in point 16, but in essence is to reduce the summer opening hours between April and September inclusive. They currently close in the summer at 7, and we would propose to close them at 5 p.m. It doesn't propose any changes to the opening days or the number of sites that we have. All of those would be the same. I think it's quite useful, Appendix B on page 207, because it just gives you some information around where people would be displaced or impacted. So we have vehicle count data at our sites, and it would show that, you know, over 94% of our 1.5 million plus users a year won't see any impact from this proposed change, though we do accept that some, because we have a significant drop-off in usage at the sites after 5 p.m. So we've acknowledged that. The report sets out the consultation timeline, which closes on the 23rd of September, after which obviously we would need to look at all of the responses, including those from this committee, and assess those and any adjustments that we might make to the proposal before we take it back to Cabinet in November. Just quickly, in terms of finance, these are set out from point 30, but in essence, I did mention at the start, this proposal is part of 3 work streams around the recycling house or waste site service. So this specifically is about the hours. The other I touched on, which is to insource Whetstone, which is the 14th site, which is currently under contract later next year. And we touched on it earlier. It is also proposing that we substantially grow our reuse business at the site, so to tackle the point that Councillor Payne mentioned earlier and really grow that reuse service that we want to deliver. Collectively, they're aiming to deliver £330,000 year on year by 2025 out of the service, and specifically this proposal is targeting £134,000 worth of savings. And if I may, just very quickly, it's lastly worth just touching on some of the wider additions or changes to the service, and they're at the end of the report from point 23, and they're just around supporting things that we've had feedback on. So the first one, which was approved at Cabinet in June, is to expand our existing permit scheme to incorporate a need for a permit where you may want to dispose of a commercial-sized fridge or an ammonia fridge, these big sort of industrial fridges. We're seeing a lot more of them through the sites. There is a concern that they're not all domestic fridges and they're not currently captured under the free permit scheme, but it would mean that you would simply need to secure a free permit to use it, and then we've got data to ensure that they are all household fridges. And the other was to set up a chargeable service, which would be new for non-household waste, that we're finding that customers are telling us are difficult to dispose of. We don't have to provide this service, but some things around tyres and some hazardous wood, they simply don't know with small numbers where they might get rid of it, and they're very expensive. So a small charge. So we're going to propose a trial with a view to rolling that out, because it's an additional service that we might add. And that's it from me, Chair, unless there's any questions.
There is a question, I think, first of all, Terry.
And thank you for this excellent and interesting report. And I'm very supportive, as I would be, of insourcing. I like the evidence-based approach to this change, because I think none of us want to cut services and make things more difficult for people. But looking at that graph, if everyone who comes after 5 o'clock piles in between 4 and 5 o'clock, you're still not going to be that much busier in between 4 and 5 o'clock, it looks like. So you think this might be doable? This might not be too painful for our residents, given that nobody really wants to make cuts. And I'm also pleased with the idea that you're going to take on tyres, and particularly railway sleepers. I've had lots of people complaining about not being able to get rid of their railway sleepers when they decide to change their garden because they were totally fashionable ones. I'd be interested to hear more, and I think Councillor Payne's you've mentioned reuse. I think I'd be interested to hear more, perhaps in a further report to this committee, which obviously Councillor Hunt would take, on how we're going to progress with more reuse. And then my substantive question, really, paragraph 17, you've mentioned that there's not going to be any job losses. How do we go about consulting with our staff, and will the unions be consulted on this one?
Joe?
Thanks for that. And just on that latter question, just to reassure you, we have fully advised and engaged with our staff and the contractor at Whetstone to make them fully aware of what's proposed as part of this consultation. And without preempting the outcome of the consultation, which could mean that we change the approach, if it were to go forward as proposed, we will fully liaise with all the staff. It's a formal process, it is an action plan, but also it involves the unions at that point. So they're fully engaged with to support our staff through the process.
Thank you, Joe. Jonathan?
Thank you very much, Chair. Going back to the graph that Terry just mentioned on page 207, I note that it actually covers a full 12 months rather than actually the period that we're actually looking at. Is it possible to actually have the equivalent graph just for the period covered by the changes? Because obviously that at the moment include data for periods when actually it's already closed beyond 5 o'clock. So it's not really representing what's actually happening for the tweaks that we're looking at making. Is that okay?
Chair, through you, we can produce for the committee
I think so. I think
graph that just shows the summer, or break it out summer.
I think that's a good suggestion by Jonathan. It will help then clarify further where we're at. Thank you.
Yeah. Chair, if I may, sorry, I mean, it is still valid and it's absolutely fine. We can break it out. The winter, it reflects the fact that obviously we close at 4 in the winter. I might not have mentioned that in my presentation, but it's to do with late nights and dark and health and safety.
Well, I understand that it's dark at 4
That
and
would certainly explain why the graph falls off the edge at 4 o'clock, because 6 months of the year it's obviously closed. Thanks.
Bill?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I seem to remember there was a court case regarding whether councils could actually charge for domestic goods or not. Because I see we're still going to charge for hardcore and soil, plasterboard and cement asbestos for households. I'm not talking about commercial, but if you do it yourself job and you've got some plasterboard left over, is that going to be charged for at £3 a sheet or £3 a tub? Because that's what it says here. Now, I understood that there's a court case, well, a legal challenge to the council's charging for domestic waste. One could class do-it-yourself stuff as domestic. I don't know, but you know,
I guess just to answer a little bit before we go to Joe, because Joe's in a bit. I think the issue is somebody may take all the windows out of DYO, may do it themselves.
Yeah.
You've got. Is that local waste? I don't know. There's that question, isn't it? Doors or major. So a lot of people do their own projects,
yes.
And I think sometimes does that count as your local, or is it actually work that would be considered? It is a question if you think about it, Bill. It's a difficult one. So over to Joe. What would you say, Joe?
Without sounding incredibly techie or geeky, just to be clear, Leicestershire does not charge, it cannot charge as a disposal authority for household waste. We don't. There is no legal definition in waste terms of DIY waste. It doesn't exist. What you have is a very complex list. It's called a Schedule 2 waste regs, which is hugely comprehensive because waste comes in many forms. But household waste is always free. It's our statutory requirement that we provide that service. But some construction and demolition material is not household waste by law. And we don't charge for all construction and demolition waste. We've chosen to introduce charges, not as part of this consultation, it's the previous iterations of changes that have been made to the service. And for those materials, we don't have to, with council taxpayers' money, provide a free service. So to maintain the service that's statutory and has to be provided for free, we do accept some construction and demolition materials, but at a small charge. And people still have it within their gift to choose to take it somewhere else, hire a skip, etc. But we do always provide household waste disposal outlets through the sites for free. So we're not subject to any risk of that. And we have checked it legally. We are completely within the law for the charging regime that we have.
Sorry.
David, thank you.
Conversation really brings us back to the question of fly tipping, because obviously I'm not saying that because you cut the hours down it's going to encourage fly tipping, because I suppose the people who are going to act in such an unsociable way would do it even if you had 24-hour opening. But I think this question of plasterboard, we've all seen it, haven't we? We've all seen this dumped in hedgerows and gateways all over the place, as well as everything else, and it's becoming an increasing problem for districts who have the responsibility for clearing it up, and the costs are beginning to rise for everybody. Could we have some kind of joint action by the county and districts to try, and the police, to try to sort of and the agricultural community perhaps to take some action to see whether we could actually cooperate to at least reduce this, to reduce this, because we're going to be accused, as soon as this report goes through, we're going to be accused as a county council of having added to the problem, and I regret that we're going to cut down the hours, even though I know it says we're told that people don't want to use the sites after a certain time. But we've known over the years that there has been an increase in fly tipping, and there has been a reduction in hours of the sites. So I'm just wondering whether we could we follow this up as sort of an idea where we get together with the districts, the police and agricultural community to see whether any action can be taken to combat this ever-increasing blight around the countryside.
I'll go to Blake in a minute. Fly tipping is one of the worst things you can think of, particularly in a rural area. It's a disgrace. Unfortunately, it's happening. To let you know, we've got a group in Melton called Melton Matters that work with the police and also will go and try and sort of notify when there is fly tipping and put signs and messages around to try and prevent it. I do feel this would have little impact. I think if they go, I think your comment was quite right. There's a group of people are going to fly tip. Most people are going to do the right thing and take it to the tip. Unfortunately, you've got your white van man who'll go to a house and pick stuff up, who is not in general going to make the money that they and the charges they charge discount. You know they're going to dump it at the local lane where they can. It is up to districts, work with the council to spot it and to notify the police. But I'm sure Blake's got some comments on it as well. But it's a fair point, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We've spoken quite a lot about fly tipping and whose responsibility, etc., etc. Just to recap on what we've previously said, and you've just alluded to it there, the district and borough councils are responsible for the enforcement of fly tipping incidences. They have some statutory responsibilities around that, and actually we had a little bit of a discussion about that under our performance reporting earlier on. In terms of joint campaign, we too take the responsibility to work with the borough and district councils to try and prevent people from fly tipping. And there's a few things I want to say. Firstly, I monitor the fly tipping data quite frequently because I want to assure myself as lead member that the policies that we have in place aren't unnecessarily contributing towards fly tipping. Let's just remember, fly tipping is a crime. The people that do this are criminals. And when we speak about this report, specifically the reduction in opening times at the waste and recycling sites, that to some might suggest that people only fly tip when the tips are not open. That's not true. People fly tip all the time. They are criminals. The second thing I want to point out is there is no correlation between any of the changes of policy, either at borough and district councils with regards to charging for green waste, or indeed some of the previous policies that were brought into place regarding the opening times of waste and recycling sites. Fly tipping, as data goes up and down, but it broadly stays stagnant across the county. In fact, I think the biggest influence on fly tipping is when a particular authority ramps up their campaign to enforce fly tipping incidences, and we see that in Leicester City in particular, which have by far the greatest number of fly tipping incidences. But when they ramp up their enforcement campaigns and start to take more enforcement action, you see fly tipping actually rise in the county boundaries. So I think there is a correlation between enforcement and rise in fly tipping. It is a fact that fly tip material, the majority of fly tip material is still household waste. It's not construction and demolition waste, it's household waste. And household waste can be disposed at any of the waste and recycling sites free of charge. Also, it can be disposed, obviously, in your bins, which get picked up on a weekly or fortnightly basis around the county. So really there aren't any excuses for people that perpetrate fly tipping. Whilst the data suggests that it's a constant level of fly tipping, about a year ago in May we partnered up with all of the borough and district councils and actually launched a campaign. It was called the If Only campaign, and it centred around 4 characters, and I think there's been a degree of success in raising the awareness of fly tipping as a crime, and hopefully people that are inclined to do such thing maybe will think twice. I know in specific borough areas they also have their own campaigns. For instance, when I was a leader of a district council, I launched the tip-off campaign because I'm concerned about fly tipping generally. But I can assure this committee, from the data that I look at quarterly, there doesn't seem to be a massive rise in fly tipping, nor decrease. It's pretty stagnant, and I'm also satisfied that by and large the policies that we're bringing to you and the council are considering implementing aren't contributing towards fly tipping per se, but there's always more to be done, and we're fully engaged in those campaigns that I've just mentioned.
Thank you, Blake. And again, reiterate, everybody sitting around this table will get complaints, I'm sure you do, of fly tipping. And it's just a matter of interest, Blake. Do you have contact with the county, with the city, to say, please let us know when you do these sort of things so we can act at the same time?
We do, yeah. We're always in contact on a number of areas. What I would say, through the campaign we started, the If Only campaign last year, the City Council, along with all the borough and district councils as well as us, we're all included in that campaign, and we're trying our utmost to try and deal with those criminals that perpetrate fly tipping.
Says a lot for partnerships. Let's go to the next agenda item. Agenda item 12. I'm sorry, did I... Janice, sorry.
Mine is just a quick question, really, regarding paint tins, if I could have it clarified. Because I know at one point, well, still, you can't recycle paint tins, empty or half full or whatever, in your bins, or you can't take them to some tips at recycle centres. Will that alter so that you can pay to take them to your local one? Because it's easier for me than to pay to take them to my local one than all the way to, say, Cosby. So if somebody could answer that, please, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
At the minute, you need a permit for paint. It's as much to be able to have that point of conversation with the resident at the point that they call to ascertain what it is, if it's got solvent, etc. So we have a conversation if it's empty, if it's full, because and so you do need a permit, but it's to give that advice. It's a little bit like asbestos. They also need a permit, but they're given that advice about how they present the material when they come to site, so they're not turned away. At the minute, unfortunately linked to previous savings that the Cabinet approved, we now only accept paint at one site at Whetstone. Yeah, so yeah, all paint has to go there. At the moment, there are no proposals to change that within this consultation. So it would be something that it would have a cost. It would have a growth pressure for us to reverse that decision. Though that's not to say that we don't work with community paint reuse organisations. There are some, so we have officers in my branch that can give advice if there are other outlets that are not necessarily as part of the county council's functions. But at the moment, there are no plans to sort of add further services back in as a growth pressure, I'm afraid.
Janice?
If that could be looked at, because like I say, it's easier to pay a permit than to keep going to tips further away. It was just, if it can be looked at in the future.
Okay, thank you, Jo. Could you just have a look at that and get back to us on that one?
Chair, we'll add that in as the response.
I think so, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is 12. This is to do with the Leicester City Council transforming cities. Who is this? Ian, sorry, at last. Normally you have a fair bit to smile in there. Can't wait to get started. Over to Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is a combined report that looks at the Government's Transforming Cities Fund and how it applies to Leicester City Council, Derby and Nottingham City Councils, and how that comes into Leicestershire, and also the Air Quality Directive that's been issued to Leicester City Council. So I'll take you through the report. We've included a number of policy framework and previous decisions there because, as you know, with the climate emergency, air quality, these matters are becoming more and more important to people. So those setting out there are the reasons why we should be supporting and helping those city councils with these reasons why they're doing this work. So we've included those. To give some background on the Transforming Cities Fund, this was a quite large £1.28 billion fund that was launched by the government in 2017. And to cut to the chase, 12 authorities, including Derby and Nottingham together, and Leicester City, were successful in being the 12 authorities that now share that funding. So quite a bit there we're going to get. The government is issuing the funding out in 2 tranches, almost a quick wins tranche 1, for schemes that can be delivered in the first couple of years, and then for those larger schemes we'll follow on from that, because you can't spend that sort of money on major transformations that quickly. So Leicester City Council's Transforming Cities proposals in tranche 1, essentially, because it was quick wins and spending money quickly, the only proposal that had any impact into Leicestershire was the electrification of the Birstall Park and Ride services. So that was something they could do quickly. There were other things in the city that were being done, but they had no impact into Leicestershire. Similarly, the reason why I'm mentioning Derby and not City, whilst there is concentrated very much between the A52 corridor between the 2 cities, it does also reach down to the East Midlands Airport and the East Midlands Gateway, as you know, vast development in that area, and how it can improve sustainable travel to those areas. So the Transforming Cities is very much about addressing weaknesses in the city transport systems, and it does that through good sustainable means, addressing walking, cycling, public transport to enable to improve connectivity to the suburbs, reduce congestion, but also use new technologies such as electrification of buses and so forth. So those tranche 1 schemes will now start being delivered, and I say the only one that from the Derby and Nottingham one that came in was the electrification of a shuttle bus around the East Midlands Gateway up at near Junction 24. But once again, that's shifting transport from normal diesel buses over to electric vehicles. The most exciting part then is into the tranche 2 funds, and Leicester City, with their outline proposal at the moment, and they are only very outline at the moment, are looking to secure between 120 and 150 million pounds, some quite substantial funding. This is all capital funding for infrastructure. We have supported, because of all the policy reasons I mentioned earlier, in principle what they're trying to achieve, because they're all good sustainable transport measures. At this time, we're not expecting any extensive works reaching out into the county area. However, some of the works, if they do on transport corridors such as bus routes, walking, cycling, or transport information provision for bus information and so forth, could reach out into the county. As we have no details of that yet, I would like to assure members that if any of those proposals do come forward, Firstly, as these schemes progress, we will be bringing back further updates here, but also full consultation in the normal way carried out by the authority will be undertaken by the City Council before any approval is given. So it isn't a case of the City Council will develop a scheme and deliver it into Leicestershire. It will go through full consultation and approval by the County Council. Similarly, that would be the same for Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire schemes into Castle Donington and Kegworth area as well around the airport. I think, just to say, the schemes in the Castle Donington Kegworth area are pretty much centred around electrification or improvements to buses, and also the introduction of cycling and better walking facilities from Kegworth and Castle Donington, which those parish councils had those aspirations in those areas, so actually quite a bonus if they can get some money towards it, but we'll see what comes forward. Essentially, the councils will be submitting their full business cases in November 2019, and once we hear decisions on what's coming back from the government, we'll bring updates back here. So that's the Transforming Cities. I'll do a brief resume of all of it at the end. If I can move on to the air quality now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The Air Quality Directive, you may have seen a lot about this in the press recently and over the past few years. A number of cities around Leicestershire have already had these given. And essentially, to cut to the chase, in November 2018, as it says in paragraph 32, the City Council informed ourselves that they had been directed by the Secretary of State, along with 7 other local authorities, to undertake further study work to consider the significant measures to bring NO2 levels, that's nitrogen dioxide levels, to compliant levels. They had undertaken previous work, as is mentioned in the previous paragraphs, but following legal challenges by Climate Earth and other organisations, the government had to react more strongly. So with that in mind, they have now been directed by the government, and I'm glad to say they're also being funded to look at the air quality modelling around certain areas in the city. Those are essentially in the real inner city part of the centre of the city, but also they are some areas of Saw Valley Way were included as well in the past, but the city parts of Saw Valley Way. What the government directs the City Council to do is they have to consider 5 options through modelling of air quality and interventions in the city, and one of those is a prescribed they have to model. So that is bringing forward a clean air charging zone. So they have to model the impact of bringing one of those in. The other 4 are for them to say what they would like to model and bring forward as part of their work. But I think it's quite important to say, because that could receive some interest and press, they are directed to model that clear air charging zone, and whatever that may mean. So the city will be have to submit an outline business case to the Secretary of State by the 31st of October. And when we have details of those, we'll be bringing that back to here and Cabinet for consideration and support. Really the next steps, as I say, we'll be taking reports to Cabinet on the 22nd of October, when we should have more details about the Transforming Cities Fund and the Air Quality Directive projects. And of course, whatever transpires out of those funds, we will bring updates back here and to local members if they affect their particular patches. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Ian, for the report. Fascinating reading it, and obviously it's directed, Transforming Cities obviously is directed at cities, but in our own area, there are patches that clearly have also similar nitrogen dioxide concentrations. Talking about Appin Way, for instance, in Loughborough, which I think is probably usually quoted as being the worst traffic hotspot in the county at peak times. And I was just wondering if there, obviously we're considering at the moment Leicester's bid, but is there anything that we can actually bid for as a county for some of the hotspots within our area of equivalent ways of trying to actually improve them?
Over to you.
Through you, Chair. Sorry for not switching off there. As you know, in Leicestershire, the responsibility for addressing air quality and monitoring and producing a plan lies with the district and borough councils, and it is our role as the Highway Authority to support them in delivering those plans. There have been no specific funds announced, such as for the direction in the city at the moment at this time that we would bid for, but we do look to work through a number of partnerships, as we've heard earlier, because partnerships is the way to work, where the districts and boroughs address those identify those sites through monitoring, then we help them develop a plan. We would then help them bid for monies towards. Often, a lot of the large schemes we may be delivering for the congestion relief measures often take up air quality measures as well, and I think the best example of that was in Loughborough, where the Loughborough in Relief Road scheme took away the air quality issues in the centre of Loughborough.
Absolutely get that point. I think I was looking also about, for instance, direction on buses, for instance, making sure that we talked about electric buses, and I'm always quite impressed by the electric buses that operated, for instance, in Nottingham, which seem to plough backwards and forwards quite happily, and whether we actually have any powers to actually direct bus operators in certain areas.
Through you, Chair, if that's okay. We actually have no powers to direct bus operators, but I was reading with interest only earlier today, as part of the announcements by the government, a £200 million bus fund for exactly moving buses over towards more electric fleet and so forth. So when I get a chance, my colleagues will be reading that more closely and seeing how we can support the bus companies in changing their fleets.
Just quite interestingly, Jonathan, in our service, the ones, not Aviva, but the ones we subsidise, you get the old crappy bus. It's about 20 years old, uses about 1 gallon of diesel a mile. You've seen it, lads. We're all in that, aren't we? And it's a shocker. But we need to do something about it. Quite. Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ian, ditto. North West Leicestershire, the worst area in the whole of Leicestershire for the county. It was DEFRA's comment on that. And it is really bad. Now, I'm struggling with lots of issues because I'm aware of this. I'm yet to convince the district council officer that this is a really serious problem. And I just wish there was some organisation I could just reach out and say, hey, can you help? I've had a resident of North West Leicestershire who's a member of the Royal Society of Chemistry, a fellow, and he's been doing this sort of modelling, not taking measurements. It's the council who should be doing measurements. He's doing modelling from the DEFRA. And it compared to boroughs in London, the Tesco roundabout in North West Leicestershire, in Ashby-de-la-Zouch. It is critical. I mean, I know about that because I'm involved with the people and various organisations, but there's a whole stretch all through North West Leicestershire from Colville. There is serious air pollution, and I just feel absolutely helpless. I don't know who do I do? I've spoke to the Director of Health here, and he's not able to help me. You're saying, look, I can't help you. Where on earth can we go to get help to try and have some action taken towards this? Because I'm absolutely concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I guess that's difficult to comment because it's more of a comment, Dan, but it's a request for help. Blake, I won't say suck it and see it, it's breathe it and see, I guess is the comment.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a really serious issue, and we're fully aware as a county council of the hotspot in North West Leicestershire. And my briefings tell me that there are a number of reasons behind that. We've also got issues with particulate matter, obviously nitrogen dioxide, there are CO2, carbon dioxide emissions, and general greenhouse gas pollutants. And one of the issues we have is the motorway that runs straight up past North West Leicestershire. It's very difficult for us to put plans in place which otherwise would be dealt with through the Highways Agency and other government bodies. So, you know, we certainly have to work with all of these agencies. In terms of air quality generally, I think the Director of Public Health will soon be delivering a report to the Council on air quality generally, which highlights particular issues in North West Leicestershire. I was briefed on that report a couple of weeks ago, and it's going through a consultation process with all the various departments. And we'll certainly be signing up as a Highways Department to measures that we can take responsibility for to play a part in delivering that plan. So, you know, it is on the radar. The one final thing I think I'd like to just plug, we've recently submitted a bid through Midlands Connect for the A5199, which A511, sorry, I get my numbers mixed up, which is for £50 million, and I understand it's the only bid in the East Midlands area that Midlands Connect are taking forward to the government, which will improve about 9 junctions, I might stand corrected there, along the A511, not least because of the problems that Dan's just mentioned. We know that North West Leicestershire has a huge and thriving logistics industry developing there. We know Amazon has just set up there. We need to create extra capacity, we need to deal with the congestion, we need to deal with the air quality issues arising from that welcome increase in growth in the area, but we need to do what we can to mitigate obviously the negative impact of that too, and hence why we've submitted this bid. So it won't solve all the problems, and maybe if I missed anything out, would like to come in after me, but it's certainly on the department's radar, and we're doing everything we can and that we know about at the moment to try and get as much resource to put into North West Leicestershire to deal with those issues.
Thank you, Blake. And just to remind everybody here that it's a major part of this committee. We have it in the annual reports. We've just seen air quality. We constantly monitor it here, which I think is very positive. I don't think he needs to respond, do you? And I think it was well answered by Blake. Let's go on to Terry. Terry.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I'm very supportive of Councillor Harrison's comments because of the problems we have in North West Leicestershire. And it is good to hear that the A511 is going to be improved and increase capacity. But I think one of the issues that we've got locally is that we're in the, at least we were, according to the RAC, in the top 10 districts for people having to travel to work by car, because we have very poor connectivity. And coming back to this report, one of the issues I'm aware of is it takes you 2 hours by bus to get to Leicester General Hospital from Colville, which is ridiculous. And so if we have a clean air charging zone in the city, which I would generally want to support that idea, I'm aware of the impact that that would have on a community like Colville. Equally, ultra-low emission vehicles, particularly if you've got to charge them up, that would have an impact. I have people in my division who have been given electric vehicles by their responsible employers, and they live in terraced houses in Colville Town Centre. And where on earth are they supposed to plug them in? So we really need to join this up. And the question then, which I hope, Ian Viz, you can take away to the city and to the government and say, come on, if you have a clear air charging zone in Leicester City, that is going to massively impact on people in my area who can't afford Swish electric cars, who are probably still running some 20-year-old beat-up car just to get to work, because they have to. And if it takes 2 hours to get to LGH, and then they're going to be charged on top for driving their ancient vehicle, it really is going to impact on my community. So can we have some of of the money that they charge people so that we can actually make things easier so people can get around from some of the more distant market towns? I'm sure we're not alone, but North West Leicestershire does seem to struggle with this a lot, into the city and out again.
So can I assume you will answer that, or you'll just say you will take those arguments?
I will take those arguments and make them to the City Council at the appropriate time, Councillor.
Well done. There are other issues. They are expensive, these electric, even the small ones are very expensive, which is an issue. And this is the problem, before we go to the next question, is that we represent the rural area. And without vehicles, a lot of my constituents wouldn't get anywhere. It's sad, but that's the case. Next question, Bill.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, it's quite simple, really. Saw Valley Way must be one of the most congested bits of road in Leicestershire, I would have thought. When I go home tonight, at this time, I should be queuing for maybe 35 minutes to get from Foss Park through to Port Pye roundabout. All that time, the cars are pumping out all the pollutants as we go along there, and any lorries or buses are doing the same. So I would assume, and it's wrong to assume, that the Leicester City, who I believe own that bit of highway, are monitoring the air quality in that area. And if they are monitoring it, do we see those figures, or do they keep them to themselves?
Ian.
So, if they've declared an air quality area or the air quality monitoring stations, the City Council will be publishing those. I do know as part of their modelling work, they've been looking very closely at that area, which is why it's mentioned in the report. If you'd like, I can take outside of here and ask them for specific data if they've got that for you.
Is that okay? Yeah, I think that'd be interesting, because I think a number of us would be interested in that sort of comment. Okay, thank you, Ian. Last question, I think. Bill.
Could I just ask how we're going to bring? We've all around the room, members and officers have said the same thing, that we're concerned about air quality, city and county, and everywhere else we go to in the country. How are we going to take this forward? Are we going to ask the Scrutiny Commission to set up a working party? Are we going to ask Cabinet to report back to us? I think we need to. We need not just to make all these comments. We need to sort of see it brought together with an action plan that we can all endorse and support.
Before I go to Blake, I do feel that we have got something going on air quality, and it's constantly reported here. But I'm aware that we're on top of this. Blake.
Yeah, just if I'm referring to page 214, paragraph 27, where it mentions DFT and DEFRA's joint air quality unit and their air quality plan for tackling roadside nitrogen dioxide. Like I say, I'm aware that the Director of Public Health to this authority is in the process of delivering quite a comprehensive report about air quality with various actions and measures that can be taken. But it is cross-cutting, it is far-reaching, cross-cutting. It does align with our commitment to reducing CO2 by 2030 to net zero too. I'm not sure what process that report is going to take in terms of the policy-making machine, but I dare say it will be before Cabinet very, very shortly.
Just before I go on to Ian, David, do you remember, was it the last or 2 meetings ago, we had a comprehensive report? It was that good. Where the high area is, do you remember? Where it had the red, and that's where we saw the areas of Colville, that corridor was shocking. I think this committee does actually follow this through. We're constantly, it's on every agenda I can remember since I've been chair. So I think have faith, we are talking about it, and all of us are challenging it as we did today, and I'm sure we'll get reports back constantly from the officers. Do you want to add to that, Ian?
Just one final point, if that's okay, Chair. Many members who are here will know this is not a new thing for the authority, and we've been introducing measures of sustainable transport, walking, cycling, chasing money from the government when the opportunities arise to tackle these issues, either with big road schemes or comprehensive packages of walking, cycling schemes in towns and so forth. We will continue to do that, and we will continue to chase that money, and with the shift in maybe the national policies, we may have better opportunities for even more success.
Thank you, Ian. And on that, I close the meeting. The date of the next meeting, before you go, will be the 7th of November, just after Guy Fawkes. Could do with him now, gents, won't we, with the Parliament? Okay, there's no items. Can I say thank you very much for a most enjoyable meeting, very informative. Have a safe journey home and drive slowly, and not too fast, because you save the environment. God bless and have a good night. Thank you.